small town girl. As I sit here typing away on the computer/electronic brain, I think about what has brought me here. My life began in the small Midwestern town of Bangor, Michigan, which can be found 20 minutes away from the cold and unforgiving Lake Michigan. Up until the point that your toes touched its frigid waters, it appeared just like any other quaint lake located in the heart of South Haven. After having grown up in the area, you would understand why you avoided the shores lined with the carcasses of dead fish who met their ultimate demise from the temperature extremes pumped out of the adjacent nuclear power plant, and the undercurrent that had claimed several unsuspecting human victims. As a child, my parents never took me to the lake that I can recall, and as a teenager, I never visited often due to the lack of transportation required to deliver me to its smooth sands. On the occasion that I did manage to find a way to go to the beach, my mom would always caution me about going out too far and getting sucked down below by the ever-waiting undertow. Gee, I can't imagine why I would avoid such a prized jewel of our local area. I shouldn't be too hard on her for putting this fear into my heart, considering she had lost her 13-year-old brother when he drowned during a church outing. To drive her point home, I recall being a young girl, younger than her brother, and going out to the beach with my father and his new wife and her daughter. As I waded out into the cold, turbid waters, my stepsister insisted that we go further and further out. Once I got to my knees, I stopped, wondering what might happen if I continued on. Would I meet my doom and be sucked into the cloudy depths of the lake, as my mother always cautioned? Or would I just find myself blissfully swimming amongst all the other young people who seemed oblivious to the possibility of their impending deaths? I continued to push further, trying to keep up with her. I got to the point that my waist and then my chest was fully immersed in this chilling and invigorating body of water. Tiny droplets splashing my cheeks as the tide came in and out. Without putting much more thought into it, and with my stepsister's ceaseless encouragement, I passed beyond the point of no return. I wasn't a short female. By 16 years old, I stood 5'6", and that's where I would stay. But as soon as I found myself neck deep, my feet gave way beneath me. It was like you were walking along a dirt path and the ground just opened. I started to flounder and panic. I was never a very good or bad swimmer, as my only exposure to this act was at my grandmother's pool behind her house, a controlled environment. I shut my eyes tightly and swam underwater towards what I hoped was the shore with all my might. When I felt like my lungs might burst, I shot through the surface and was relieved to find myself within feet of the shore. While I gasped for breath, my stepsister stood laughing with this odd expression on her face. Now I wonder if she had hoped I would have just drowned for her amusement. I shuddered and wrapped myself in the towel left where it had been dropped before I decided to toy with my mortality. I never swam in that lake again, and my stepsister never once admitted to what her true intentions were. I honestly don't even think my father noticed or knew what happened, and I never told him. By that time, I realized it would have been pointless. With age, I've come to understand how our life experiences make us who we are and help us guide our children and our loved ones to avoid the same fates or trauma that we've suffered. My mother was always the protector of our household from the very first moment I can recall. I truly believe she did her best to try to help us avoid certain dangers and at least grow into adulthood. Her methods weren't always optimal. If you drive a car, you could get into an accident and die. If you go swimming in anything other than a swimming pool with chaperones, you could drown and die. And if you wandered off in a store, someone could steal you and you could die. I have to say the fear tactic did work for the most part. To this day, I hate driving, rarely ever get into anything other than a swimming pool for recreation, and I have told my children the same tale of the nefarious stranger that is hiding behind every corner, inside every ice cream truck, and within every store, just waiting to steal them and throw them into a dark hole filled with spiders and bones. For context here, I'd like to point out that approximately 840,000 children in the United States are reported missing each year. This is about one child every 40 seconds. You may find my methods morbid and maybe even over the top, but I've managed to keep my 2 children alive into almost adulthood as well, so I guess there's some sense to it. Also, I'm not alone in my use of this strategy. I'm 99% sure that both of my sisters and my younger brother employed these tactics with their children, and guess what? No fatalities so far. We like to be prepared. Teaching your children, or anyone for that matter, that life is filled with rainbows and unicorns does nothing to help them when reality comes to town, riding a dark horse with its never-ending bags of horrendous tricks. Speaking of human frailty, religion wasn't something I thought about at a young age. As I got older, I fell into various faiths based on who I was associated with during the time. My mom was Catholic by birth. However, she didn't go to church regularly. I remember going with my Aunt Mary, her sister, once, and I felt like it was just a series of sitting, standing, and kneeling on very uncomfortable pews and benches. I do remember there were very pretty statues, though. My father was Mormon after he married my stepmother, and I went through the whole process with that religion as far as reading their Bible and getting baptized so that my soul wouldn't be tormented in hell forever. Not because I understood anything else about the concept. They did teach me how to make some pretty cute yarn dolls, though. When I was about 8, my mom let me go to church with my best friend Larissa, and I wasn't expecting what would come of that experience. This was the first time I had been to a predominantly, if not all, African-American church, and I showed up, the only little white girl in the crowd, wearing the only fancy dress that my mom had sewn for me, which was also white. Larissa held my hand proudly, and when the preacher asked me to stand so that everyone in the congregation could see who Larissa had invited to church, I was beyond embarrassed. To this day, I'm not a fan of being singled out. There I stood in this sea of people that I didn't know, and they all seemed happy to have me there. I just wanted to hide under the pew so that they would stop looking at me. Later in life, I imagine what the whole thing must have looked like to them. Sheepish little girl in a knee-length ivory dress, complete with ruffles and lace, holding onto the edges as if she were Dorothy, thinking, if I click my hand-me-down shoes, I could at least turn invisible. I was embarrassed because I didn't like being the center of attention. In school, I didn't raise my hand, and in life, I hugged the corners of most events, hoping no one would notice who I was. I've become more comfortable with these types of situations through necessity, but inside, I'm still that little girl that just wants to hide away until the only people around me are my family and close friends. In the current social climate, I look back and realize that I never put much thought into the fact that I was the only white girl in attendance. I guess I just didn't see color. I saw a multitude of smiling faces that were genuinely happy to have a new person in the audience listening to the word of God. My issue was that they were all smiling at me all at once. I feel like ever since I was little, I've seen the world differently than a lot of people around me. To this day, I have a hard time understanding it. The world, that is. I found the differences in skin tone to be interesting, exotic even. It drew me closer to them, like they had a secret that I wanted to know. Maybe they were part of a fairy tale that I just wanted to become a part of. Maybe they had seen places that would fill my mind with fascination and wonder. One of my young friends named Juana that only came up during fruit picking season. I only remember her being in school with me for 1 year, and she gave me a Mexican peso before she had to go back to wherever it was that she called home. I was too young to ask where that was. She spoke broken English, and she wrote me a note saying goodbye. I cherish that small piece of metal and still have it in a keepsake box to this day. Fast forward many years, and I think back on countless conversations I've had while exploring family connections through DNA testing. More than once, people shared their worries that a newly discovered relative might not want contact because of differences in background or identity. Each time, I found myself saying the same thing. If they don't want to know you, then that's their loss. It usually brought laughter, but I meant it sincerely. Anyone who believes that they're better than someone else based on superficial traits isn't worth the time. From what I've understood through researching my family's ancestry is that we all hold the same origins. I know I'm generalizing, but this is what I believe from what I've learned in my 47 years on this earth. We're all human. No one is better or worse based on our shared DNA. Our actions make us better people or worse people. I say our actions as opposed to our beliefs because I've witnessed the actions of some who believe and attend church. As soon as they get home or they step away from that building that they believe God has sanctioned to make them better than others, they are the same people who beat their children and allow atrocities to occur by indifference or outright hatred of someone based on their beliefs, skin color, sexual affiliation. Therefore, you can believe all you want. How you put those beliefs to work is your true measure. As a side note, who gets to choose which church or religion is the true and correct one? Humans wrote the Bible. Kings changed the Bible to suit their needs. Remember Henry VIII? I don't think his wives could forget him. So, which one is the right one? Is it the one covered in glittering jewels and gold? Or is it the dilapidated building in a small town that is sustained through the parishioners' donation? If Jesus or Melchizedek, Watma Buddha, Osiris, Zeus, Sol Invictus, and Use Asaph chose, which would they choose? I do not mean to disrespect anyone who believes in any of those divine figures, prophets, kings, etc., or anyone who believes in all the myriads of others. To be quite honest, I'm sure they all existed in some form, and they could have been exceptional beings. I just know there's been a lot of bloodshed trying to determine who's the correct deity or entity that should be followed, and to this day, there's no agreed upon answer. I guess if I had any advice, I would say, believe in what feels right and does the least amount of harm to the universe around you. I say universe because we are not all that exists. I was recently informed that scientific research has shown that plants emit ultrasonic sounds when under stress, which could be interpreted as a form of screaming. These sounds are too high-pitched for humans to hear, but can be detected by specialized equipment. Essentially, when you pick a plant, it produces a subtle clicking or popping sound due to stress, which is not audible to the human ear. So if plants can all but scream, then it's not very easy to do no harm when we have to eat. However, we could be more mindful of our wastefulness and maybe kinder to the resources that we need to sustain us. This is just here on Earth. Who's to say what exists out there in the eternal expanse of space that surrounds us all? For a time, I went to a Protestant church. This is not to say that all Protestant churches are the same. However, these church members believed that God spoke through them. The chosen ones would speak in tongues and writhe about the pews. Anyone not taking part and contributing to this scene was considered to be backsliding. In this church, there was a man who would end up making sexual advances towards his daughters-in-law. Yes, 2 different daughters-in-law. I knew both young girls. Explain to me how God would sanction this. Protestants do not practice polygamy. So I say again, your actions are what make you better or worse. If those actions are not true to your heart, then they truly aren't yours. To want to do the right thing when no one is looking, to help others regardless of who they are or what their background is, to know that you hold no more intrinsic value than any other human on this earth, and to know that our actions affect the entire world around us, and therefore we must be responsible for those actions. That to me is what makes a person better. To only want what you want, and to act on those impulses, well, that would be worse in my book. And religion isn't a veil you can hide behind. I don't consider myself any particular religion anymore. I do believe there's a God of sorts. I believe that there's something out there that is more than us and that designed all of this. Science teaches us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, when we die, our energy becomes something else. We live on through this energy transformation. My daughter and I went to visit my father's grave when she was young, maybe 10, as she sat in the dewy grass next to his headstone at the Fort Custer National Cemetery in Michigan and read him a story she had written. A brilliantly colored dragonfly hovered over the stone. It rhythmically oscillated from one end of the stone to the other. She continued to read, a tear escaping and slowly falling to the page. The dragonfly just patiently lingered. Why couldn't my father's energy be a part of that beautiful creature? Maybe it wasn't. But whatever energy that was a part of that dragonfly held it there captivated, listening to my daughter pour out her heart to her grandfather. When she stood and walked away, the dragonfly flew off into the surrounding pine trees. I'd like to believe that some part of my father was there. Growing up, money was always tight, but we managed to get by, with food on the table and clothes to keep us warm. Our first home was a single-wide trailer at the top of the hill owned by my grandma. There were 3 bedrooms in the back, a single bathroom next to my parents' room, followed by a kitchen, then the living room, and some sort of front room where the wood stove kept pumping out heat during the long, cold winters. Missy Mutt, the little brown dachshund, spent most of her time in the front room, and our fearless German Shepherd Bear guarded the house until he went to work with my dad. During the summers, my sister Katie and I would run barefoot through the field behind our house, which was blanketed in wild strawberries and peppered with Christmas trees. My grandpa ran a Christmas tree farm, and the whole immediate family helped. My grandparents had 15 children, and I wonder if it was to help on the farm or if it was because they were Catholic and birth control is not allowed. You could also see how much they loved each other, so that could be why as well. I remember watching my grandpa get a wily look in his eye, and shortly thereafter he would grab my grandmother around the waist or pinch her on the bottom. She was the apple of his eye, and he was hers. I don't know if I've really seen that kind of love very often, and if I have, it's not normally after 15 children have become a part of the story. I was very lucky to live so close to my grandma growing up. Her house was like a sanctuary. When I was about 5 years old, I ran away from home. This would have been in the single-wide trailer at the top of the hill. My mom helped me pack my burgundy leather suitcase, which was half the size of my body, and she sent me down to my grandma's. When I got there, I put on my eggshell-colored cotton nightgown, covered in tiny strawberries, and I told my grandma that I was running away because I spilled the gallon of milk I insisted on carrying to the house when we got back from the store. My mom told me later on that it was a sight when all the country cats came running to lap up the milk. After a very short time of following my grandma around the house, I decided I should probably go back home. I was sent on my way back up the little dirt path lined with wild grapes, dragging my suitcase behind me to the top of the hill. I was still in my pajamas. My grandma stood at the bottom of the hill, and my mom stood at the top until the handoff was complete. Strangers are everywhere, remember, even in the country. Mind you, if strangers aren't enough, there are bears, cougars, and vicious wolverines roaming about the countryside of Bangor. I was a country girl through and through, with everything I could ever want or need. I had my sisters Katie and Becky, my grandparents, my mom and dad, and my trusty dogs. I would spend hours playing with my Barbie dolls in my closet, so entrenched in what I was doing, I didn't hear my mom calling me for several minutes from the doorway. If I had a bad dream, I would crawl into bed with my parents, and I would squeeze in right between them because it was the warmest spot. In the mornings, I would sit and watch Wonder Woman while my sisters were at school, and I would think about what I wanted to be when I grew up. The world was perfect, and I was the luckiest little girl in it. Strange story for you readers. I vividly recall a memory of this time that involved me and Wonder Woman. I was possibly 5 years old, and I was sitting in the living room in front of a small TV watching my favorite show of all time, Wonder Woman. As I sat quietly on the little multicolored rug, I realized I wasn't in my body anymore. I was floating above myself, looking down at the top of my head, wondering to myself, I wonder what I'll look like when I grow up. And that was it. Was I dreaming? Is this some strange memory that I think I have but really don't? I guess I'll never know. Maybe that whack to the head with the metal entry door in grade school did more damage than I thought, as if the concussion wasn't enough. What I do know is that to this day, I believe Wonder Woman worked at our local grocery store Harding's. The woman was a dead ringer for Linda Carter. If we haven't established it yet, I have a big imagination. I know that in reality, she was not the Wonder Woman, but she was my Wonder Woman. The benefit of being able to look back at a situation is that you can see so many things that you would have no way of understanding if you were still right there in the moment. I started having nightmares when I was about 5. Most of them were silly. A shark was swimming in our small bathroom full of water when I opened the door to go in. Apparently, the glass shower door was strong enough to hold the water in. I was dying of thirst, and I couldn't seem to grab the ribbed plastic orange cup hanging right above me in thin air. How could I have known that these dreams were trying to tell me something? That very soon, my world would be turned upside down, and that my dad would no longer be my own. It's crazy what a child will do to try to stop the looming tide of changes and chaos. Did I really think my dad would stay if I handcuffed my ankles to the living room chair? Yes, I actually did this. My dad was a policeman, and he forgot his handcuffs at the house one day. I managed to find them and entrap myself until he came home to release me. Was there any way that such a small, inconspicuous girl could hold on to the best thing she could have ever had? Or was this just my first introduction to harsh reality? My understanding of death was also dropped on me suddenly, like a bomb out of nowhere. My aunt was watching over us one night, for whatever reason, and she decided it was a great idea to let me know my mom and dad were going to die one day. I don't think she expected me to go into a panic like I did, and I cried until my parents came back home. When they pulled into the driveway, I jumped into the car with them and buried my head in my mom's shoulder, wailing that I didn't want them to die. My mousy brown hair was in tangles, and there was no doubt a good amount of sweat and snot helping to make matters worse. My mom rocked me back and forth and told me it was going to be okay. No one was going to die, and there was nothing to worry about. My first vividly real memories that have stuck with me throughout my entire life hinged on being torn from a perfect world and thrown into a world that ultimately always ended in death or at the very least disappointment. We lived in our cozy little trailer until my dad left when I was about 6, and my mom remarried and had my little brother, Thomas. We called him Tommy or Tom. Tommy was a sweet baby, and I adored him, except for when he would get into my things. Shortly after my mom got remarried, we moved to the house down the dirt road from the trailer on the opposite side of my grandma's house. Our family owned all the lots on the right-hand side of the road from the stop sign to the top of the hill until my great-aunt sold her 2 lots. My grandpa had built their single-story house in the 1940s, and my mom was born in the basement of the house when he was still working on it in 1950. When it was completed, it had to have at least 8 bedrooms. Some of them were in the basement. The walls were finished with wood paneling on the bottom, and it always felt open and airy. We would have a family reunion every year, along with Easter, Thanksgiving, and Christmas celebrations, all down at my grandma's, and we would all eat and enjoy having each other around. This seems to be a dying tradition. During these family gatherings, we would have a dining room full of traditional American food, and we would wander the halls getting patted on the head if you were little, and patting little kids on the head if you were older. My mom called it the gauntlet. If you were feeling brave, you might follow an aunt or uncle into the basement, to their bedroom, or to the room with a pool table, and hope that the lights didn't go out or someone didn't try to leave you down there alone. I remember that no one drank alcohol at these get-togethers. Maybe they weren't of age, but I had no knowledge of alcohol until I turned 15, and one of my aunts decided to try to deter me from ever drinking it again. In case you wonder, it didn't work, and in fact, it had the opposite effect. I don't blame my aunt. She had good intentions. But I think teaching moderation in everything you do is more beneficial than trying to get you to puke your guts out. My family had a wicked sense of humor, but it was always good fun. The basement smelled like mildew, and it was always damp and cold, probably why it smelled like mildew. My aunt told me recently that it still smells that way, and we had a good laugh. Grandma kept her thousands of jars of canned goods that she would spend hours preparing, so the family always had vegetables and fruits down there for meals. Most of the time, you weren't allowed to go into the basement, but every once in a while, you would get asked to go retrieve something or find an aunt or uncle that may be in their room, and it was always a dreadful experience. I would slowly open the door to the basement and stare down the worn wooden stairs into the looming darkness. Maybe I was hoping someone else would go instead, and time would be my friend. To find the light, you had to reach around the side of the wall until your fingers touched it, always managing to come in contact with a hopefully vacant spider web. Once you had your bearings, you shot down the stairs for the item in question, or you ran screaming the aunt or uncle's name, hoping they wouldn't jump out from a dark corner, most of the time with a loud boo-ha-ha to make it terrifying. Once you had completed your mission, you ran full speed back up the creaky staircase and switched off the light, slamming the door behind you to keep whatever creatures that were somehow too slow to capture you in their shadowy dungeon. I hated the basement. I still do. My mom raised me, my 2 sisters, and our half-brother almost completely by herself. I say half-brother only because biologically he is. However, he is and always will be my brother. Blood isn't the only thing that makes a person your family. In my younger years, I think I bonded more closely to my brother because he was just starting school when I had several years left. My oldest sister was always studying, and my middle sister was in sports, so they didn't seem to be around much. My little brother was stuck to me like glue. It annoyed me then, but now I look back and smile, thinking of all the dorky things we'd do together. We were lucky enough to have my grandma living right down the dirt road from us because she helped a lot. I don't think a day went by that she didn't come over or that we didn't run down to her house for something. A lot of times she was called to referee because my mom worked and I was terrorizing my little brother. My dad worked as a police officer for Bangor, but for a good majority of time he was busy managing his stepchildren. My mom worked packing apples, giving shots to turkeys, and as a cashier at the Ridgeway Market, all run by the Stacaro family, and she was on her feet from dusk till dawn. I don't remember a lot of hanging out with my mom, other than when we would all sit together in the living room and watch horror movies. To this day, I love them. Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Hellraiser sound pretty horrific to some, but this was our bread and butter. I think it was just our way of relaxing and escaping the daily doldrums. We knew it was fake, but it could really get your heart beating. To save money, I wore my older sister's hand-me-down clothes, and to be quite honest, they were probably handed down by my aunts when they got to my sisters. Our Aunt Lori was about the same age as my oldest sister Becky. They were still in good shape, as they took good care of them. And as an adult, I can see that it didn't kill me. When I was younger, I always wished I had the new styles that most of the other kids at school had. It wasn't until I was about 10 that I started to notice that my clothes were just a little different than the popular kids at school's clothes. In the 1980s, the cool thing to wear would have been shiny, stretchy leggings with some sort of animal print, leg warmers, and a bright-colored slouchy top. I begged my mom for the leggings, and she went out of her way to sew me a pair of zebra print capri-type pants. The material wasn't stretchy, more of a lightweight cotton material, and I think I probably wore them once. I was afraid of being made fun of coming to school in my homemade pants, and even though my mom did her best and tried to make me happy, I was the typical ungrateful, overly worried little girl trying to impress everyone else. I remember those pants sitting in the bottom of my drawer for the longest time. Looking back, I realize how much time and energy I wasted worrying about meaningless things like my clothing. Most of the other kids in school were more than likely children of school teachers, industrial workers, or agricultural workers. None of us were financially bubbling over with wealth. I had 3 siblings, whereas some of the better dressed kids had maybe 1, and my mother did not own a credit card until I left Bangor for the Air Force, maybe even after that. We bought what we could pay for at the moment, and no more than that. I would be willing to guess that the better dressed of Bangor were reliant on the use of credit to produce the lifestyle they depicted to others. I don't fault anyone for either way of thinking. People put their values on different things, and the only way to build your credit is to use credit, which to me is ridiculous. I would think if you went your entire life out of debt, then you should have a high credit score. When I started to pay attention to what others had and what I didn't have, I wanted so badly to be able to keep up and to maybe one day be rich. I would go to school and pine after the thought of being one of the popular kids, and even tried out for cheerleading, thinking I had a shot since my sister Katie had made the team. I put on my best crooked tooth smile and I walked up to the stage to perform the routine Katie had practiced with me. It was the most confident I had ever felt since my dad had left, and I started to notice that I wasn't like the rest of the kids in school. I jumped, high-kicked, and belted out the school spirit lines, finishing up with my hands placed proudly on my bony hips. It didn't matter. I wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't until so many years later that I found out my sister only made it by accident, as another girl was supposed to be chosen and they couldn't get out of keeping her on the team for the sake of appearances. My sister ended up being crowned homecoming queen, and she was always beautiful, so attractiveness was apparently not a requirement either. In all honesty, the girls that I wanted to be like weren't what you would think of as far as snobbish, selfish television characters. I could count the girls on one hand that tried to come across as better than others, and oddly enough, they weren't the same popular girls that came to the school in the latest trends. The girls who seemed to be crafting a well-to-do persona came from families that couldn't have had more money than mine. After it was all said and done, those zebra print pants ended up in the same place that the spandex cheetah print pants found themselves. And do you know where that was? Neither do I. I'm glad that I originally held the younger, popular girls on a pedestal. I can remember how sweet some of them were and how quick they were to help or to show empathy for me when something was not quite right. The leader of the group was a beautiful little Filipino girl with porcelain white skin and silky black hair that bounced when she walked. She had a smile that would light up the room, and all the boys loved her. I invited her to my birthday party when I was about 10, and when she showed up, it was like Taylor Swift had taken time out of her day to visit with a poor little farm girl. There was no semblance of phoniness. It was like she really wanted to be at my party with my homemade cake and water balloons waiting in the front yard. If only I could have held on to whatever I was doing to bring someone with such a sweet disposition into my slowly deteriorating world. I can understand that as we all got older, my trajectory took me farther away from these young, pure girls and closer to the group that had something to prove. I always tell my daughter Mackenzie that regardless of the bad that I went through as a youth, I wouldn't change a thing. Who's to know if that one difference would mean that I wouldn't have her or her brother in my life? I would suffer it all again, knowing that one day they would be my reward. My hope now, with the knowledge of how my decisions brought on a lot of what I overcame, is that I can guide my children to paths that will avoid the same trials. My mother grew up an innocent farm girl, reminiscent of Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz, only with a lot more spunk. But she had to have her own battles. I can't believe that we had the same ones, and I know that this is why she couldn't prepare me for what I was consistently doing to myself. Technology has come a long way, since I was young. And I thank my lucky stars that it took a while because I would not have handled it well. Our family home had no computers or cell phones strewn about the house. The first cell phone was made available to the public in 1983 for $4,000, and the battery only lasted for 30 minutes before it died. We had 2 cathode ray tube TVs that received the free public television channels, and occasionally, when we weren't being monsters, my mom could watch her favorite soap opera, Guiding Light. My first cell phone was a pay-per-use flip phone that I bought in my early 20s while stationed in Spangdahl, Germany, just in case I needed help on the Autobahn, the federal controlled access highway system in Germany. In school, I remember writing lines of code for the Apple computer, about 6th grade, and once we got into high school, there were computers that we used to play Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, which was released in 1985 for one of our classes. It wasn't until I got to my first military base in 1997 that I was even aware of the internet and email. My world was so much smaller. Based on the entertainment options available, and with the addition of living in the country, we would have to find things to keep ourselves occupied. At one point, we had a huge sand pile, and me and my little brother Tommy would sit out there for hours and build sandcastles. I remember digging out the bowels of what would become detailed fortresses with our hands and little shovels, the damp sand sticking to our legs and our bare feet. When the sand pile was put to its actual use around the outside of the house, and therefore no longer a pile, we would create our own treasure hunts with objects we thought we would find valuable later in life. I once put messages in glass bottles and sent them down the stream across from our house deep within the woods, never thinking there could be something lurking in the depths waiting to make me a meal. Odd, considering everything else I would do would always potentially lead to my demise. On another occasion, I found a very odd-looking coin or metal of sorts, maybe Civil War era, in the woods across from my house, and I buried it maybe 2 feet down where our chicken coop is now. Good luck finding it today. I was attempting to create a treasure map with the intention of going back to find it. I don't know if one of my stepbrothers dug it up and took it, or if it's still there. My point is that we had huge imaginations. We watched the stars in the soft grass at my best friend Rachel's grandmother's house in Breedsville, and we eagerly hunted for alien spacecrafts. We peeked out from under our covers, waiting to catch a glimpse of the ghosts that wandered the old black schoolhouse with a red door Rachel lived in, all the while hoping that we never did see one. Was that you standing in the doorway, Becky, or was it a specter? Boredom was met with a broom and a sink of dishes, and therefore was the last thing you admitted to. Today, my son asks me to sit in his bedroom and watch videos with him as a source of entertainment. In her pre-teenage years, my daughter took endless Snapchat photos of herself with dog ears and stars in her eyes before getting bored with that and wanting to go into town and watch a movie or go shopping. I love the fact that they want me to be around, but I wonder how much technology has removed their free-floating imaginations. Sure, my son still tried to catch the tooth fairy dragging his enormous incisor from under his pillow, but did he ever pull out his dinosaurs and plan an all-out attack without needing me to be there defending the gates? When Mackenzie was young, she would dance for hours in her princess gowns, and she would serve me tea while I multitasked. I've watched them step into their own minds and search for something to bring out. But once the cell phones and the computer games and the endless technological noise was introduced, it's like that journey stopped. Or maybe it's just different. In the summertime, since I was 8 years old, my family would get up at the break of dawn, which was typically around 5 a.m., and we would all put on our ratty work clothes. At the same time, my mom was remarried, and his children would go to work with us. All 8 of us, including my baby brother Tom, who would have been maybe 1 year old, would pile into the burgundy station wagon and head out to the broccoli and cauliflower fields owned by the McDonald's family, and we would plant or pick the vegetables. Tommy would sit in a playpen at the end of the row, and as we moved, he would be placed near enough to reach him if needed. We told him he was born in the Cabbage Patch, and he believed us. I remember doing this when it was very hot and muddy outside, as well as when it was cold and the ground was frozen, which tells me we must have done this on other occasions besides summer break. I hated getting the little velvety green cabbage worms on me, and to this day freak out when I find one in my garden. When we were finished working for the day, which was from sunup to sundown, we would have dirt everywhere. I probably still have some McDonald's dirt deep in my lungs or ear canals. Maybe that's why I don't get as sick as others that live in sterile environments. Once I turned 13, I graduated to picking blueberries at Mrs. Clayton's blueberry farm about 3 miles down the road from our house. Mrs. Clayton was also our school lunch lady, and she was always very sweet. I would walk or ride my bike down County Road 215 with my 2 cousins, Bobby and Michelle, or sometimes by myself. Our lunches would consist of wish sandwiches because we wished there was some meat on them. Normally, they would be made up of Miracle Whip, tomatoes, pickles, and possibly cheese. They were actually quite tasty. I remember riding my bike back home one day, and a man about 40 years old, with what looked to be his pre-teenage son, pulled his beat-up truck over next to me. His calloused elbow hung lazily outside of his window. He'd asked me if I'd seen his horse. I said no, and he proceeded to tell me that I would know if I saw it because it was well hung. I had no idea what he was talking about and just pedaled away from him while he cackled and drove off. There were other occasions where I would ride my bike down this paved road and the seasonal farm workers would yell catcalls at me. I was only a kid, and once a man let me put my blue Schwinn in the back of his truck to take me to see my cousin who lived about 20 minutes away on a bike. Someone must have been looking out for me because way too many bad things could have happened to me in my innocence. It was this innocence that was tested time and again in the household with the addition of my 2 stepbrothers. All my life, I had been taught to tell the truth and listen to my mom. These people were so alien in the way they thought and acted that my world was thrown into another unstable tornado that brought with it hurt and mistrust. On the weekends, when my mom decided it was time to clean, my sisters and I would have to wash the black tar, tobacco residue, from the white windowsills deposited there by my stepfather's never-ending cigarette chain smoke. If we weren't doing that, we would have to clean out his filthy clear glass ashtrays that almost always had a huge disgusting booger that he left for us as his sick gesture of a gift. Another of his gifts could be the 20 to 30% increased chance of developing lung cancer. Thanks for that. I couldn't really give him all the credit for my increased chances of lung disease, considering my stepmother would smoke with the car windows rolled up to avoid being cold while all of us kids were trapped inside. I went through years of ear infections brought on by these exposures as a child. My mother never smoked. At one point, we had moved into town in a 2-story apartment by what the locals called Mosquito Park. My mom would grow rhubarb in a small patch near the apartment and make homemade rhubarb pies for us. One lazy weekend, I made my way downstairs, wiping the sleep out of my eyes, and I noticed that there were playing cards tossed across the floor at the foot of the stairs. I was always a very inquisitive child, and upon further examination, I observed that these playing cards were of the type that adults would use that were adorned with nude women in various poses. I knew these cards did not belong to my mother or my sisters, so unless the porn fairy flew past and dropped them, there weren't many other people who they could have belonged to. I'm also sure that my mom did not see them yet, and when or if she did, they ended up in the trash. Unfortunately, I had come to realize that misogyny existed, unless that busy porn fairy was to blame. It was in this apartment that I started to realize what it meant to be a woman to a lot of men, or what has seemed like a lot of them from my experiences. My stepsister lived with us for a short time in this apartment. She was much older, so she left early on. My step-cousin and I would sneak into her bedroom upstairs, and we would prance around in her high heels wearing her fuzzy blue robe. We were so much smaller that it drug across the floor as we sashayed back and forth, trying to see who looked the most grown-up. Not long after she left, I recall a pretty good chunk of time that has always been something like a black hole. I remember bits and pieces, and what I remember is more like a nightmare. But I've heard that sometimes our brain blacks things out when we suffer a very traumatic event. I don't know that I ever want to know what exactly happened. I do have good memories from the apartment, picking my mom's brightly colored daffodils and putting them in a handmade paper basket on the door handle for her to find them. Reading so many books at the top of the stairs that I could win a school award. Trying to get into a clear glass cookie jar at the top of the cupboard when my mom wasn't looking. These memories I hold dear to me. We moved back to the house by my grandma's shortly thereafter, and life got even more confusing. My stepbrothers had a need to use half-naked women as their wallpaper, and their teenage friends would come over and hit on me. I can see now that I'm older that the scantily clad women adorning the walls is not really out of the ordinary in our society. I still don't see how a bony, prepubescent girl, 10 years old, could have been attracted to anyone, let alone a hormonal, scrawny halfwit that to this day looks like he belongs in a sideshow. I may still hold a grudge even now, but I can promise you it is well deserved. Note to all parents out there, arm your children with the facts of human nature when they're old enough to understand. Kids are innocent, and most of the time they just don't know how to react because they weren't expecting the incident to even occur. If they have already been forewarned, then they'll be more likely to tell you or to make sure the offender knows they will suffer consequences if they offend. I was beyond proud to hear that my child defended herself when another child their age attempted to touch them inappropriately. You may feel awkward with these conversations, but I'd rather feel awkward than for my child to be taken advantage of. All that said, my exposure into adulthood started to accelerate. It's amazing how fast a perfectly normal childhood can turn into a nightmare. I guess we all have them, right? Nightmares. Once my mother remarried the second time, I had a reoccurring nightmare that a giant thumb was protruding out of our bathroom door and the floors kept slanting to throw me off balance and make me its prey. I grabbed onto the walls and anything in the room that I could until I woke up from the nightmare. It never did get me, but it was horrifying. A friend of mine had stepbrothers that were notorious thieves with no scruples, and if you had anything you held dear to you, it would need to be protected and defended. Every night, she would go to sleep in a cold sweat, worried that one of them would sneak into her room and try to steal what wasn't theirs. Nothing was safe from these filthy creatures. One of them would ask to sleep next to her at night, and she soon found that wearing the tightest blue jean cutoff shorts was the only way to make sure he kept his hands where they belonged. Where are these monsters created? Does everyone have these stories? My friend's mother never knew, and probably still doesn't to this day. I can remember an incident involving a book that I treasured being held precariously over a bathtub full of water while the individual threatened me they would drop it. I screamed and said that I would tell, and as they let the book slip from their long, bony fingers, they laughed wickedly and said, "Who do you think your mom is going to believe? You or my dad?" I ran outside into the yard with my dripping book and I told my mom what happened. This was the first time that I truly learned that once you have nothing left, the only thing you can do is be honest and face your demon head on. Up until then, I had been blamed for the cigarette in the bathroom toilet. I was at the most 10 years old at the time, the broken outlet in the garage, and any other destruction that occurred in our house. Finally, my mom realized the depth of their deceit, and at long last, she believed that I was innocent. A few months later, my mom asked me what happened to her Jenny that always smiled. My smile was taken away when my dad chose another family for his own, when my mother remarried into a family that didn't respect young girls, and when I realized ultimately what it meant to be a female. If I only had the voice back then to tell her all these things. Instead, life would go on. In the same breath, hindsight is 20/20, and I do not believe for a moment that my mom was aware of half the things I was going through. That being said, what would have changed if I had found that voice and told her from the very beginning? I have a feeling things would have turned out much differently. There are a lot of contributing factors to why people stay in unhealthy relationships. Kids have a lot to do with that. I won't try to tell anyone's story but my own, but I will say I was grateful when my mother got a divorce. My little brother would be caught in the middle for years, which is a horrible place to be. I tried hard not to put my own children in this place, but no matter how well divorced parents try to work together, they are divorced for a reason. I would still never recommend parents to stay together just for the sake of their children. At least they could have two separately happy parents as opposed to living a false life, or even worse, living in a toxic environment. All situations are different. You can't make your children truly happy unless you are happy, and you are the ones that must live with the choices. As I got older, I was able to work at the local ice cream shop, the chicken coop, which resembled a KFC, and eventually, my last job before I joined the Air Force was stocking shelves in a market, one town over from Bangor. Every year after returning to school from summer break, most of my classmates would talk about how much fun they had over summer vacation, and I couldn't even imagine it. We had our own fun in the fields sometimes, but there was no sleeping in or going to the beach. I can see merit to raising your children both ways with respect to working. My daughter is now 20 and my son is 17, and my son has not had to work a day in his life. My daughter begged for her first job at 16, and I only allowed it if she was able to maintain her grades. My priority for them was graduating and being able to continue their journey with as many tools as possible. This is only an option if you have the financial stability to make this choice, which thankfully I did. I loved that during their youth, they played in their rooms or read books over their school breaks, and that they didn't have a care in the world other than small household chores. I can also see that my past experience has shown me what true physical labor and responsibility were. I know as an adult with children that there's no choice. I have to work, and I have to make sure that my family is supported. Thanks to the decisions I made after high school, I was able to get a job that relies more on my intelligence and doesn't require as much physical strength. Again, I don't know if either is a better way to live. I just know that I enjoy the path that I was brought to, and I don't think I would be as happy on another. Every occupation out there, save a small handful including drug dealers, bank robbers, identity thieves, has value and is important. We are what makes the economy what it is, the boots on the ground. Without the janitors, our schools would not be safe for our children. Without truck drivers, how would we get the products we need to run our daily lives? Where in the world would I be without a strong and resourceful mother that brought her character and personality to the sweet country market that everyone knows in my small town? These jobs require the ability to work well with people, to make an impact on those they meet, and to create the atmosphere that people are looking for when they enter their establishments. I give so much credit to those that do the jobs that seem thankless at times. They don't hand out quarterly awards or make huge banquets to celebrate the achievements of these people who are making our wheels turn from the ground up, and yet every day they are up and they're back at it. While my children will hopefully remember their childhood as a series of books and trips to the beach or sleepovers with their friend, they will also remember hearing their mother talk about a different childhood and how it was just as wonderful, but in a completely unique and character-building way. In case you're wondering, I left out the not-so-wonderful parts. I didn't think they needed to know anything more than the fact that things like abuse exist in many forms, and that not everyone has your best intention in mind. I tried to teach them to always watch for the predators and to avoid becoming a victim. The yellow number 10 school bus took us to and from school every day. The ride home took an hour long since we were one of the last stops. In the mornings, one of us kids would stand at the front door with our face pressed against the cool glass and watch for the bus to emerge at the top of the hill. You would normally hear it first. Then we would scream, "The bus!" I always had to be way over the top when I did this, and it was more of a banshee screech than a scream. Everyone would run to make sure they didn't miss it. It was a short run, as the road went right past our gravel driveway, which was only feet away from our front door. Sometimes, if we were all standing outside waiting for the bus on warm spring mornings, I would make silly faces at my sister Katie. She hated it and would scrunch up her face and say, "You're so bogue, Jenny." Bogue was her shortened word for bogus. I just figured when you had nothing to do, you learned to find ways to entertain yourself, and this would keep me laughing for hours. To this day, I have a knack for making people laugh. I remember the whole act of getting on the bus like it was a musical. The bus would screech to a stop in front of our gravel driveway, kicking up dust from the dirt road, and the door would fold inwards as the bus driver pulled back the handle. Our bus driver was the same sweet old man for so many years. He would smile almost every time we got on, the creases in his face deepening with every year that we grew older. All 5 of us, including my 2 stepbrothers, would drudge up the bus steps, shaking off to sleep, and we would search for open seats. I would always get nervous because unless there was a seat open with my cousin Bobby or Michelle, then I had to sit with someone I didn't know, and I pretty much figured they wouldn't want to sit with me. I'd shyly ask if the seat was open while I fidgeted with my backpack, and if they scooted over, I would slide onto the cold brown leather seat and lean my forehead against the seat back in front of me to avoid any awkward conversation before we got to school. The bus ride home was never as bad because there weren't as many kids on it. If it got too loud in the morning, my sister Becky would stand up and yell in the manliest voice she could muster, "Shut up!" It was always so funny because she probably weighed 80 pounds soaking wet and stood about 5 feet 4 inches, but everyone shut up at that point. She would then turn around and sit back down in the seat directly behind the bus driver. I wonder if she laughed under her breath. The year that I graduated, in a class of 85 students, Bangor had a population of 1,946. To put this in context, in 1996, New York City had a population of 7.361 million, and Fort Walton Beach, Florida, which was a military town, had a population of 21,752. Bangor has a total area of 1.9 square miles, of which 1.83 square miles is land and 0.07 square miles is water. The population density for Bangor was 1,030.1 inhabitants per square mile, compared to New York City at 27,857 per square mile and Fort Walton Beach, Florida at 2,606 inhabitants per square mile. My point is that Bangor was a small country town. Everyone knew everyone else's business, down to the most trivial detail. That was unfortunate for those that made stupid decisions in their youth. I pretty much kept to myself growing up. I had a handful of friends, and for the most part, if I wasn't in school or working, I would be running cross country or staying the night with one of my 4 truly wonderful girlfriends I had. I liked cross country because I only relied on myself. I was never much of a team sports fan because I didn't like being yelled at when I made a mistake. I found the concept to be pointless. I knew I wasn't going to be any type of famous sports player, and I didn't feel like I was good enough to contribute to a school team, so I avoided them any chance I could. I did try out for volleyball and cheerleading. We already talked about that, but unsurprisingly, I didn't make the cut. Running was a different matter altogether. When I ran, I didn't have to worry about what everyone else was doing or if anyone was looking at me. I would get to the end of the trail when I got there. I would say I was on a pretty unremarkable path until I turned 12. Save the early exposure to obscene and demoralizing behavior thanks to non-blood related family. I was a scraggly little girl with an overbite, crooked teeth, and hairy arms, and I just tried to keep my head down and make it through my days without being seen. It was about that time I started hanging out with a group of girls that I spoke about towards the very beginning. We can call them the deviants. Not to be confused with my fabulous 4 mentioned in the preceding paragraph. It was during this time that I started to change for the worse. It seemed like the attention I was getting at the time was wonderful, but it just led me to a darker and darker path. It was never me that any of these deviants or leeches that clung to them cared about or wanted to know. It was all about what they could get. I was such a naive and giving girl, and I just wanted to feel like I mattered to someone during this ridiculous hormonal period in my life, and this weakness is how the leeches found their way in. I became a terror to my mother, and I used my father as a way to sneak into town and hang out with this amoeba-like group. The actors didn't always stay the same, but the roles they played did. I began drinking and doing whatever I could to try to make these people like me, and it just continued to drag me further and further down. My breaking point came the day I finally took a good look in the mirror and found my worth. It was after I had been shown that there was nothing left that I could give, and that these people had no intention of ever treating me the way I was looking to be treated. Finally stood up at the front of the bus and yelled, "Shut up!" metaphorically speaking. These people had no power over me or my future unless I gave it to them. When I went to school and literally showed my bruises and the welts on my back, what could they do but threaten that they would find me alone at some point and I would pay? Empty words. Oddly enough, it was never the perpetrators that threatened. It was always their sisters. The culprits avoided me like the plague. Why is that? Speaking of connections in the present reaching back to the past, just last year, August 2024, my best friend's younger brother, Twan Williams, was stabbed to death while sitting on a couch of one of the individuals who threatened me during my traumatic event. The case is still being reviewed, and a 24 November 2024 Kalamazoo, Michigan news article describes the horrific details of the case. I find it tragic that it seems like the same horrible events just keep playing out over and over where I grew up. But then that'll happen if justice was never sought to begin with. I think that in my case, I just didn't understand my options. I don't feel like I didn't press charges due to fear. Fear has a way of making me dig my heels in. My best friend and I are a lot alike in that way. She will continue to seek justice and to increase awareness of the growing mental health problems we have, no matter who threatens her. Twan Williams was a good kid. Every time I visited my best friend, he would be nearby, doing something to make us laugh. I'm so sorry that this happened to him and to his family. Yet another murder can be tied to this same group of people. Deborah Boothby was murdered in 1998 in Covert, Michigan, and after 9 years, the cold case was finally solved. In November 2009, 4 people had been arrested and charged with her death. From what was reported, several people knew about who committed this murder because they were a part of it. Her daughter knew some of these people involved in her mother's death. This poor woman was missing teeth from being brutally beaten and then run over to make it look like a hit and run. Yet again, no one said anything until they couldn't keep it secret anymore. Some people just didn't want to get involved. Some people were afraid of what would happen to them if they spoke up. The truth always comes out. You can find a very detailed YouTube video about this case. This is where I found all this information. I started carrying pepper spray with me to school, and I was admonished for it by a teacher because they said I wasn't supposed to have it. I told them why. A girl said she was going to wait for me after school to, quote, beat my ass, unquote. And therefore, I felt the need to protect myself. But this wasn't a good enough answer. They confiscated the pepper spray, and the girl never showed up. Ironically, this girl and I had been friends in our preteen years. I remember going to her house and walking to get penny candy at the little store nearby. She was a nice girl when we were young, yet she became another person connected to the web of people involved in my assault. The school never reached out to see if I was okay, and life continued. I never pressed charges against the perpetrators of the final crime against me that led me away from them. The local police made me feel like it was my fault that it occurred because I had been drinking. I remember sitting in the little room in my high school with the officer while I told him what happened and showed him my back. He said I could take them to court, but the statement was empty. It was like everyone just wanted me to forget. My father had to have known about it because the police community was small and he still lived in Bangor, but there wasn't much he could have done. I think this is why I became very adamant about not cowing down to people who try to scare you. It made me stand more firmly against their threats. What more could they do to me? I went to school. I dealt with their rumors and their constant threats. I wore the blue jeans with a cigarette burn mark on the thigh in an act of defiance. I continued to make the normal adolescent poor choices, but the road grew less dark. I was in control of this roller coaster, and no one was admitted without my choosing. I kept the photo of my back that my best friend took using my small rectangular purple 35mm camera. I still have that photo. I keep it to remind myself what I have overcome. I keep it to remind myself that the reason I had that welt on my back was because even when everything was happening in that dilapidated house in Breedsville, I stood up against these boys. I fought back. When I did fight back, the head boy, I don't know what else to call him, pulled out a knife and told me he was going to kill me. Not the exact word he used, but you get the point. I stood in the middle of the living room, my hair wild and my face streaked with tears, and I screamed hysterically, "Well, then why don't you do it?" He didn't do it. I don't even remember what he did. To be honest, looking back now, I probably scared the life out of him. Who would expect that response? I don't know how I even said it. It wasn't until I calmed myself down after one of my soon-to-be escorts told me the boys in the house wouldn't let me leave unless I settled down. Then I was free to go. When I left, they insisted that they send the two youngest boys to accompany me as I sobbed uncontrollably down the paved road toward the main center of the town, pushing along my blue Schwinn. I remember that these two were genuinely concerned about me and just stood by during the whole event. Their faces were blank, like they refused to admit what had happened. I think they were scared of what would happen to them if they did anything else. It doesn't make them any less culpable, but I do understand why they probably acted that way. We got to the main center of town, a tiny convenience store and a payphone, and one of the boys from back at the house ran up behind us. I had started to cry again because I thought we were far enough away, and when they heard him coming, they cautioned for me to be quiet. It's a strange way the body reacts to trauma. I immediately stopped crying, came rigid, and slowed my breathing. I've seen animals in the wild do this, minus the crying part. I guess it was just a survival instinct that kicked in. The tall, gangly boy in his ridiculous basketball jersey slapped me on the back like we were buddies and said, "We should do this again sometime." I looked up at him, his large, toothed smile looming above me as he stood smugly, and I bit the inside of my cheeks and replied emotionless, "Sure." I then pedaled home in a haze. The 20-minute ride was like I was floating. It was effortless. As soon as I got home, I asked that I be allowed to go to see my best friend. I must have looked like a train wreck, but I was permitted to go, and I'm eternally grateful for her comfort. I didn't give my mom the chance to ask if anything was wrong. She probably just thought that I'd gotten into an argument with a boy or a friend and was upset. Teenagers are hard to figure out sometimes, and parents don't always know the right questions or what to even do when they get the answers. My recommendation is to ask the tough questions. Be blunt. The worst thing that can happen is that you can get them to tell you the truth. After that, you protect them like a female elephant. I do not fault my mother for not knowing what to do, or for not knowing exactly what happened. I will love her even after I'm gone. When given the chance to do something after this horrific event, she came through for me. A few of the same boys drove to my house late at night and poked their heads through my window asking me to come out with them. I got up slowly. I had been asleep, and I said, "Let me go make sure my parents are sleeping." I walked to my mom's room, knocked on her door, and told her there were boys there who wouldn't leave me alone, and they were by my window. My mom's husband got up and handled it. Those boys left and never came back. I'm not telling you these things to point out people who have hurt me. I'm telling you because you need to know what happens. I have mentioned no names, and I will not. I have put this all in the past, but it is my past, and it could be other young girls' current situation. I was lucky to have parents who, when they did know I needed help, were there. But you have to tell them. I had some pretty dark days, but thanks to them and to everyone else that has supported me, I have come out of that darkness. Speaking of the darkness, for the most part, Bangor that I grew up in was safe. Or at least I always thought it was. We didn't lock our doors, and we weren't worried about what would happen to us if we were alone at night. However, looking back, there were 2 murders that I remember vividly. The first murder was of a girl named Rhonda Stevens in November 1988. I was 10. Rhonda was born in 1969 and was from South Haven, which is west of Bangor and lies on Lake Michigan. I remember hearing some of the details in conversations occurring at my dad's and at my mom's. My dad was the investigating officer for this particular case, and in the end, a man she personally knew was convicted of her murder. He is now serving a life sentence at Chippewa Correction Facility in Kinchelo, Michigan. From the stories I was told, there may have been more to the murder than was officially presented as the findings of the case. My dad wrote about it in one of his books, and my sister also remembers this time. The young boy who originally found the body was my girlfriend's little teenage brother. He said that when he found her, she was hanging from the train trestle by her jacket. My mom always found it odd that Rhonda's clothing was folded neatly in a pile when they found her. I don't know a lot of people who, in a fit of rage, fold their victim's clothing, and this leaves the case a bit mysterious. Was there someone else at the scene? Considering the murder happened in late November, the temperature would have been dropping, and most girls would have been wearing their jackets. Rhonda was strangled with her jacket, which makes you wonder why she had it off. Was she wearing it tied around her waist as this man walked her home, and when he raped her, the jacket fell off? Is it worth dredging up these horrible memories to try to understand why, or is it better just to leave it alone? However, the events of that night played out, and Rhonda was not allowed to finish growing up. There would be no late nights listening to Debbie Gibson or Def Leppard. No more autumn nights walking along, wondering what her future would hold. All of this was stolen from her. Today she rests in Lakeview Cemetery in South Haven, Michigan. Only she can tell the story. The second murder involved the shooting of 15-year-old Adriana Bell in Breedsville, Michigan. A 15-year-old friend of hers was convicted of her murder. This case hit closer to home as I was older. She was murdered in September 1994 when I would have been 16. And because Breedsville was a place I visited often to see my friends, I say friends, but truly they were just a cesspool of leeches, save my best friends Rachel and Quinn. Quinn lived on the outskirts of Bangor and Breedsville. I met Rachel in kindergarten, and I walked up to her and asked if she wanted to be my friend. This was how my mom told me to make friends, and it worked. She looked at me through her beautiful blue eyes and said yes, her rose-red colored curly pigtails bouncing as she smiled. Rachel would unfortunately move in and out of Michigan. It seemed like every few years. And Quinn moved to South Haven at one point, which would leave voids that I filled with the less desirable people linked to Adriana. Adriana and I ran with the same crowd. However, we didn't personally know each other. My boyfriend at the time would occasionally talk about her, and I, being a young girl, would get jealous. The day before she was killed, I saw her standing in the front of the 2-story blue house on the left at the top of the hill as you enter Breedsville from the south on 54th Street. I was headed in the opposite direction on my blue Schwinn as I was leaving Breedsville and on my way home. I lurched up the hill, pumping my legs as hard as I could, and I heard someone screaming in my direction. I turned my head to the right, trying to keep my momentum going, and I saw Adriana with her full lips painted in dark burgundy lipstick and the blue gangbanger bandana used to create a high ponytail with her long, shiny raven black hair standing there with a few local boys surrounding her. She started to loudly threaten that she was going to beat my ass, and I'm sure there were other choice words. However, I never was one for confrontation, and I just continued to pedal. I couldn't really go that fast considering the hill is pretty steep, but I pedaled nonetheless, and she just stayed tethered to the end of the driveway, as if she was wearing an ankle monitor. The report read that the 15-year-old boy shot Adriana in the face with a shotgun after she refused to be his girlfriend. I do not doubt that that is exactly what happened. The crowd Adriana and I ran with were wannabe gangbangers. For the most part, they claimed to be members of the Latin Kings. However, occasionally one of them would say they were gangster disciples, and they would throw up a different gang side. Both gangs originated out of Chicago, and more than likely, one of the kids had a relative who was or knew a gang member, and that's how it all got started. After some research, I found that the Latin Kings had a branch known as the Holland Latin Kings, which were, as I'm sure you guessed, based out of Holland, Michigan. Likely, one of the older kids both Adriana and I ran with was affiliated with this branch in Holland. However, this is something I will never know, considering I have done my best to stay as far away from this part of my life as possible. When my eyes met with Adriana's as I rode past her house, I saw myself as much as I never would have admitted it then. I was never as vocal, but I was just as ready to prove just how tough and grown up as she was. And in the end, I can only be grateful that I was on the other side of the road and not standing in her shoes. She was a young girl who hadn't even known life yet. She was looking for someone to pay attention to her and to make her feel like she was a part of something. She was me and I was her. At school, I heard that during her funeral, there was a drive-by shooting. I always thought that this was the strangest thing because Bangor was such a small town. This was the moment that I finally realized how completely stupid it all was. My aha moment that I spoke of in the paragraphs preceding. This town and this life could not be it. I had to pull myself out of this self-destructive group of people, and I had to find another way. I had to change. I started hanging around with my friend Amber more frequently and avoiding the group linked to Adriana. Amber was tall, 5'10", quiet girl with gorgeous kinky curly light brown hair. She lived on the edge of Bangor towards South Haven in a one-story house. I remember the first time I went to her house, I was trying so hard to be a big shot and act like I was older than her, and she gave me a letter she had written to a pen pal from another state, which was a thing in those days. As I read it, I was shocked to see that she was actually born on the same day and year as me in the same hospital in South Haven. What are the odds? I fessed up to my lie, and ever since then, we've been like two peas in a pod, and she became another girl I considered to be a best friend of mine. You can have more than one. This isn't like the 1986 movie Highlander. There can be only one. She had a younger brother that for the most part left us alone, and we just hung out in her bedroom and read magazines and imagined our futures. We also picked on her little brother if we were bored, and he was bothering us. Once we were wandering through her mother's overgrown vegetable garden in the fall, and I picked up a pretty large rotten tomato from the leaf-covered ground. It was oozing with maggots, and her brother stood at the other end of the garden mocking us. So I threw it at him, aiming for his midsection. He stood shrieking, his mouth wide and his large teeth jutting out as the rotten tomato, worms and all, lodged itself into his mouth. He started to retch, and all I could think of was, wow, I have bad aim. Amber chased after him as he ran, spitting out as much of the putrid fruit as he could onto the garden path home. She breathlessly begged him not to tell, which of course did not cause him to stop. Later on, she would bribe him with candy, and he would sometimes keep our ridiculous secrets. I can't help but think most of my friends' parents thought I was a terror. I don't blame them. I was mean and spiteful and only thought about myself. The only friend that ever stood up to me was Rachel, and when she did, I learned quickly that she was not one to be messed with, unless I wanted to get smacked with shaving cream across my face again. All of the others just let me treat them like I did. Maybe they felt sorry for me, or maybe they just didn't know how to respond. Regardless, it was inexcusable, and I am truly remorseful for the way I treated them. Today I understand why I acted the way I did. I was hurting, and I wanted to release my pain. Take it from me, it doesn't help. Through Amber, I ended up meeting Jimmy, my junior year of high school. He was a sweet, quiet guy with a heavy metal vibe. His hair was shoulder length and black with a medium wave to it, and he was about my height and rail thin. He lived in Hartford, Michigan with his family. He caught my eye one day when I was walking past his locker and Amber's friend introduced us. He was completely different from all the other guys I had dated. By now, I was 16, almost 17, and I had been through quite a rough introduction to the male condition and what could entail being with them, or at least this is what I understood to be true at this point in my life. Jimmy was soft-spoken and agreeable. He played guitar and wore ripped blue jeans with t-shirts topped with a flannel. When we started dating, it was like I finally had someone that liked me and that wasn't trying to manipulate me into doing anything I didn't want to do. It was such a change. We dated for several months before I decided that we should just get married. I was still rebellious and wanted out from under my mom, and I was also now Protestant and was being told that sex before marriage meant eternal damnation. I was naive enough to believe that, and I also figured I could never do any better anyway. I threatened my mom that I would get myself emancipated if she didn't agree to the marriage. By then I was 17, so she didn't have a lot of options. By then I had pushed her to her limits with my constant misbehavior. I had been threatened with juvenile detention after I snuck a boy into our house and couldn't get him out because my mom got sick, so she didn't go to work like she usually did. I hid him in my bedroom for a few days while I went to school. One day, my mom needed to reset the breaker, which was on the wall of my bedroom, also where he was hiding, and she stepped on him when she tried to get to the electrical box. He groaned, and she more than likely jumped several feet in the air. I never intended for him to stay more than a night, but fate had other ideas. Came home from school to find my mom waiting for me, clearly upset, and rightfully so. She had already contacted his grandmother, who came and picked him up from our house. I do wonder how the conversation went, probably for the best that I didn't know. After that, I was arrested for shoplifting at a large mall with a cousin of mine and one of my best friends. We were all in the Leo Club, and the trip was a school function. I was given maybe $10 for the trip to spend, which was a good amount of money back then, based on our socioeconomic status. But not good enough for me. My cousin and best friend started lifting small items from a store named Spencer's, mainly jewelry, and I asked them to take things for me. We went on to another store and loaded up on perfume, which was easier because things weren't locked up back then. And then we made our way to a larger department store and started stealing jeans. We didn't realize technology had advanced, and the large black glass balls in the ceiling were cameras watching our every move. When we walked out of the store with a bulging bag of stolen goods, security came rushing out after us. They were just waiting for us to leave. It was like time had stopped. These were serious consequences, and yet I was so used to chaos, by now I didn't react. They hauled us to the local jail, or at least somewhere with bars, and they interviewed us one at a time after taking our mugshots and fingerprints. My mental response at this time was to ask for my powder makeup compact before they took the photo so I could fix my face, as I must have cried at some point. The cops were beside themselves with my reaction. They shoved me into a cell and told me I was the ringleader and asked if I just wanted to stay in jail for the rest of my life. That's when I broke down. I think reality finally hit me. The funny thing about it all is that after this happened, I was placed on 6 months, maybe a year of probation, given 100 hours of community service, and had to pay a $300 fine, which deterred me from ever even giving the appearance of trying to steal anything in my future life. I will not divulge what the others did. That is their story to tell. The main point is that I wasn't the ringleader, but I played that part very well. So now I'm 17 and married to a guy that I don't think I ever loved, but that maybe seemed a savior to me at the time, and this seems to be what I was constantly looking for. We lived with his parents in his upstairs bedroom for a bit until we could afford our trailer to rent. The trailer was $300 a month, and Jimmy worked at Kmart while I worked at the Hartford Market to support ourselves while I finished high school. We lived off Save-A-Lot reduced price food, and we counted every penny. I never want to eat another ramen noodle or hamburger helper meal again in my life. Life was probably what it would have been like forever if the turn of events hadn't brought me to my breaking point again. There were a lot of things I could stand. Living within my means, being happy with a simple life, going church twice a week so I wasn't accused of harboring the devil in my soul. What I could not put up with was being sexually targeted by a close relative of my husband's. Up until this time, I had been approached by my girlfriend's and a boyfriend's parents and had to graciously turn down their offers. I set up a sting operation with my girlfriend, and her mother caught him in the act. I would call my girlfriend, and he would consistently answer the phone first, making me speak with him before I could speak with her. After weeks of this, I grew tired of dealing with it, and I told my girlfriend. The next time I called, she made sure her mother picked up the phone line, and she heard for herself about his disgusting offers. When I knew she heard, I hung up. This continuous occurrence of men believing I was there merely for their gratification was finally to the point that I just couldn't put up with it anymore. You can allow yourself to be prey, or you can set the trap and catch the predator in the act. On days that Jimmy had to work, his relative would take me to and from church on Wednesdays. One day, he dropped me off and came inside. He gave me an extended hug on his way out, which was normal, but then he proceeded to get an erection that I could feel through his pants poking into my leg, which was luckily covered in a thick, long skirt. Through his putrid breath, he thickly drawled, I better go before I get myself in trouble. I merely let him release me and walk out, and once he was gone, I sat on our secondhand couch and just stared ahead. When Jimmy got home, I told him what happened. He did nothing about it. The following Wednesday, his relative brought me to Kmart to pick Jimmy up. Jimmy must have been having car trouble, which was normal as our cars were always breaking down. As we sat in the car waiting for Jimmy to get off work, he placed his calloused and greasy hand on my thigh. Shortly after, Jimmy got into the car and we went home. I was fuming. I planned for a friend of ours to hide behind the clothes washer and catch this predator in the act. It never came to that. Instead, I told Jimmy I was leaving and he proceeded to bang his head with a cheap light blue metal Kmart saucepan until blood began flowing. The pans weren't meant for blunt force, and therefore the metal bent into sharp edges pretty quickly. He had already punched several holes in the walls during times that I would say a swear word and he would start shouting that I was the devil. I recall one incident where I was listening to the 1993 Adam Sandler comedy cassette tape. They're all gonna laugh at you. And every time Adam Sandler swore, Jimmy would laugh with me and then start yelling about the devil. It was like a scene out of a bad horror movie. After the pot smashing event, I called my mom and she headed over to pick me up. Jimmy's relative got there first, of course, as they lived closer, and they both went into the back room to pray. It didn't have much effect, or maybe it did, because I wasn't there much longer. As I planned my escape, he begged me to stay. I couldn't live like this. When my mom maneuvered up the snowy driveway, he followed me and angrily grabbed me by the hood of my dark green winter coat. It strangled me as he pulled me backwards towards the trailer. I used all the strength I could muster, and I pulled away from him and jumped in the car. I went back one final time with my mom, and I loaded up my pitiful number of belongings. I took my clothes and the porcelain dinner set that my father gave me as a wedding gift, the wedding that occurred at the Protestant church we attended in the same town, where a KKK rally was being held that very same day. If that wasn't a sign to run for the hills, I don't know what it was. When I was growing up, Bangor had one grocery store, Harding's, no stoplights, and most of the people worked at Freestone's Pickles, in the school system, or at one of the few small shops located on the main street of Bangor. It could have been a very cute town if someone put in the effort. I still believe it has a lot of potential. I'm imagining it as an old pioneer town with a candy shop and a root beer stand. Over the years, it's gotten a stoplight and a few more chain businesses, but its location between South Haven and Kalamazoo could have brought in a lot more tourists and money if they just used some imagination. Every year, Bangor hosts a very cute 4th of July parade, and honestly, some of the best fireworks I've ever seen, so things may be changing for the town. One of my favorite things to do when I would go home after they started instituting these new activities is to sit on the curb and watch the parade with my family, and then watch the fireworks at night while the local rock band played in the center of the field. Invest in some mosquito spray, though. In my senior year, my stepmother got me a job at a grocery store in town nearby, as she was a cashier there, and the vocational training center that I went to for photography class at the end of school was right around the corner. Seniors were given the option to work for a few hours during the school day and still receive credit hours. I liked the other employees at the store, however, I knew this is not where I wanted to be for the rest of my life. As I stocked the shelves with cans and prepackaged food and goofed off in the back sorting empty pop bottles, I went through the motions of life with no direction and no idea what my future held. Now I call them soda bottles. Funny how a word is different depending on where you live. My dad and my school friend Quinn pushed me to join the Air Force, as they both knew that this was my only option. Quinn joined the delayed enlistment program to become a food service specialist a few months before I did, and she kept hounding me to talk to the recruiter. I didn't have the grades or the money to get into a college, and I didn't want to stay in Bangor. The Air Force offered me a chance to start over, to get away. At the end of my senior year at Bangor High School in 1996, I started my divorce paperwork after less than a year of being married, and I signed up for the DEP, Delayed Enlistment Program. My life was knocked into a completely different trajectory based on the choices that I was making, and I didn't even realize it at the time. My world was being cracked open, scrambled like a bowl of eggs, and recreated to include so many new and exciting ingredients that I didn't even know existed. I will probably say this several times, but the Air Force changed my life forever, and it was what I will always believe to have been for the better. I would not be who I am today or where I am today without them. I always referred to them as Mommy and Daddy Air Force because they took care of me. In all reality, I believe my life would have taken a much darker path without the structure and opportunities provided by the Air Force. My mom drove me to the St. Joseph, Michigan Air Force recruiter's office, and I met Sergeant Unger for the first time. He looked so commanding in his starched Air Force uniform. I was young and had no idea what to think. Would the Air Force even take me? I was clueless about what was going on in the world in 1996, as I never paid attention beyond what was happening outside of Bangor. It was all I knew. When I was younger, I remember doing drills in school to practice being attacked by the Russians. This would have been the end of the Cold War. I never really understood what I was doing other than hiding under my desk or in the hallway with a book over my head. I just knew the Russians wanted to kill us, and my hardcover English book or laminate and metal desk was going to protect me. Without realizing it, I was joining the Air Force to become one of these protectors. Little did I know that the self-defense mechanisms forged in my youth would serve me well as a soldier. In 1996, there were several conflicts just beginning to include the Allied Democratic Forces in Uganda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Nepalese Civil War, the Civil War in Afghanistan, and the First Congo War. The Khobar Towers terrorist bombing occurred 25 June 1996, and I remained clueless until after years of military training in which this terrorist event was extensively covered. Growing up in a small town is sometimes like growing up in a bubble. Unless outsiders come in and broaden the perspectives of those inside, it's as if events beyond the bubble's boundaries never really happened. No one in my house talked about war or even being in the military, or I just wasn't listening. Today I talk about close to everything going on in the world when my children are around. I explain that our small town in Roseman, California is not all that exists. There is life beyond, and some of it is unimaginable. You must understand that you're a part of a larger picture. This was something I didn't realize until I joined the Air Force. As I stood at Sergeant Unger's well-organized cherrywood desk, my thoughts were only on what job the Air Force would give me, where would I travel, and when could I start taking college classes. At the time, my thoughts were focused on the opportunities ahead, and I didn't fully grasp the potential realities of military service. Sergeant Unger coached me as best as he could, as far as explaining what job I should sign up for and how I would need to begin running again to get back in shape to meet the physical qualifications. Luckily for me, running wasn't a problem. This was one thing I was good at on so many levels. I was never overweight, and the running was more to prepare me for what I was getting myself into. As for the job, I had no idea what a bioenvironmental engineering journeyman was, but it was a lot better than anything I would have to look forward to in Bangor without an education. I was a clean slate, and Sergeant Unger could have told me to choose any of the jobs offered, and I would have done it. Sergeant Unger and I met several times before the process was complete. He guided me and told me what to do and what not to do when I was finally sent off to basic training. His tips included avoiding attention, dressing in black t-shirt and jeans, and not wearing makeup. The idea was to draw as little attention as possible, which for me was simply my usual way of operating. In theory, this would have worked great had my dad not gifted me a travel bag covered in multicolored flowers. I never did let him live that down. Sergeant Unger also gave me a short list of toiletry items I would need to bring, and everything, including my extra clothes, fit into the small square floral bag. I can still hear my father laughing when I told him the notoriety this bag brought me on the first day in basic military training. Before I could leave for basic, I still had to go to the military entrance processing station in Lansing, Michigan. My dad drove me to the Greyhound bus station that took me to MEPS, and as we sat together in silence, I yawned. My dad told me that yawning was a sign of being nervous. I yawned again. If I had ever asked or paid attention to anything but myself, I would have known that my dad went through this same scenario. In 1970, my dad was drafted into the 601st Army Medical Detachment in Fort Clayton, Panama during the Vietnam War. He knew exactly why I was yawning. When I got out of the car to go to the Greyhound bus, I didn't cry. I was being bombarded with emotions, and all I could think was that I had to be strong for my dad. I had to finally do something to make both him and my mom proud of me. I had to finally become an adult, and the only way I was going to be able to do this was to get on that bus and wait for my next stop. I really don't remember how long to get to the Lansing Greyhound station, or even who picked me up and took me to MEPS. From research, you'll find that the Greyhound station in Benton Harbor, Michigan is a 2-hour drive to the Greyhound station in Lansing, Michigan, which is then 10 minutes away from MEPS. More than likely, there was a military type waiting to pick me up along with anyone else in my situation. I do remember going through a bunch of tests, and I may have even gone on one occasion before this, but time has removed this memory from my mind. I remember that everything was white and clean, sterile in a way. People were moving from one location to another, and they all seemed to know where they were going. But I was on autopilot and was just being pulled along. They tested my blood, made me do a duck walk in my underwear with other female recruits, and they gave me every exam possible. It was humiliating to an extent, but I knew this is what I had to do to move on to the next phase. I also understood that these were professionals. They were just doing their job. After you've gone through the entire MEPS process and have had a final interview, they run a complete background check on everyone, and fingerprints are done. You swear the oath of enlistment. From here, you are on your way to basic military training. Every future service member must swear the enlistment oath. This is a promise that you must adhere to for your entire military career. I, state your name, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me, according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. After I left MEPS, I went to a hotel. Again, I don't remember how I got there. This was my first time in a hotel, and I thought it was clean, and the room was huge. I couldn't imagine why one person could need all this space. Other kids from MEPS were sent to the same hotel, and I remember that they were all excited as this would be their last day of freedom. Some of them drank alcohol, and some of them smoked pot. I was offered both by a few of the males, if you can imagine that, but I was so terrified of getting caught and not being allowed to join the Air Force that I refused and went to sleep. I chose me this time. It was a good thing because I would need my rest for the following days. When I woke up, I was taken to the airport and I was sent to Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. This was my first time on an airplane, and it felt like everything the Air Force had planned for me would be brand new experience. On the airplane, they served a meal reminiscent of a TV dinner in a cream-colored plastic reusable tray with peas and some sort of meat. I ate every last bit, as I was always taught never to waste food. It was dark when we flew, which either meant it was just that early or my mind is mixing up which flight was first. Since joining the military, I've flown frequently, and by now this memory too may be a bit muddled. On this first flight, I didn't talk to anyone. I just stared out the window and watched the world stream past me in a haze. When we landed, we were herded together, and one by one, we were called by our full name. A tiny woman in what I would soon learn to be wearing a battle dress uniform, BDU, collected thick manila envelope packages from each of us once called on. These packages were originally given to us sealed, containing all of our MEPS personal documents before departing MEPS. When we were handed our packages, we were instructed not to open it, and you had better believe I did not open mine. When the woman called my name, she asked me a question, probably if that was my name, and I responded with, yeah. Never again would I respond as such. From here on out, it would be yes, sir, or ma'am.